Shrewd Manager Christianity's position. Within the tradition of linear perspective, the shroud image is an orphan, with no known ancestry for its style, technique, materials, time, place, and esteem. In the last video, we learned how forensic pathologists interpret the legs on the shroud man. Now on to art history. Historians of art look for the stylistic and formal development of artistic traditions and put them in an historical context. To be handcrafted, we expect evidence from the shroud to fit in the time and place of its manufacture. The shroud made its first undisputed appearance in about 1350 in Liry, France, so this is the time and place we are interested in. Foreshortening is a form of linear perspective. Historians credit Brunelleschi and Donatello with deriving linear perspective from their rediscovery in the early 1400s of ancient Roman and Greek art. Foreshortening means to visually shorten parts of a body or object while maintaining the illusion of proper proportion. To illustrate, the shroud image has foreshortening of the lower legs, but these copies don't. The difference is obvious. Here's a list of pioneers of foreshortening. This map plots their names, key dates, and cities they're closely associated with. And here's Liry, France. Now the same map in 1300. There are no examples yet of foreshortening, or even of its formal development. By 1350, only the shroud exhibits foreshortening. 1400, still only the shroud. By 1450, several examples of foreshortening appear in northern Italy. By 1500 and 1550, we are well into the tradition of foreshortening. So the shroud is a geographical and chronological outlier. Now let's consider a specific example. Andrea Mantegna, perhaps the greatest early exponent of foreshortening, his method is exemplified in the Lamentation over the Dead Christ, circa 1470 to 1480. Unlike the shroud, this is obviously a work of art. Observers note that Mantegna uses a special kind of perspective called artistic foreshortening. He deliberately reduced the size of Jesus' feet so as not to block our view of the body. Whereas if a photograph was taken from the same angle, the feet would have been so big that they would have obscured our view of the legs and torso. The shroud image's anatomical dimensions, conversely, show photographic foreshortening, not artistic. Artistic foreshortening is not a question of could, but would. A lot of talented artists existed before the 15th century. With canvas and paint, any of them could have portrayed Jesus with foreshortened legs. But would they have? Think of jazz music as an analogy. Here are a couple of pages of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Features 4 vocal soloists and a full chorus in the parallel modulated key D major. I don't know what that means, but it sounds hard to do, especially since Beethoven wrote this while he was deaf. Does anyone think Beethoven couldn't have composed jazz pieces? He didn't, though. Not because instruments evolved to have new notes, or that the human ear is physically different now. No, he didn't write jazz pieces because jazz wasn't invented yet. Patrons didn't know it, expect it, or demand it. Foreshortening is like this. Now let's revisit the copies. These are true copies, meaning they were painted directly from the shroud. This one dates to 1516. This one to 1710. These others fall within the 2 dates. Then, as now, artists regularly copied works of art. It was one of the ways students learned their craft. Here's Raphael's drawing of Michelangelo's David. However, the shroud copies are very different from routine copies of art. This research paper tells us the true copies were often commissioned by popes or royalty and used as gifts or for public display. They were offered to kisses of the faithful, publicly venerated, and many were touched to the original to sanctify them. We'll revisit this last point in a later video when we discuss pigment on the cloth. First-generation copies were copied and copied again. However, there is no evidence the later generation copies were sanctified on the earlier. It appears that these earliest copyists and patrons considered the shroud very different from standard works of art. The many visual differences between these and the shroud are obvious. None of the legs are foreshortened. Almost all are fully visible and separated. They are obviously paintings with outlines, artistry, and often inscriptions. And here are other paintings of the shroud, many from exhibitions throughout the years. The shroud is different in style, quality, technique, and materials used. So, based on our study of the legs, does the shroud look like a work of art? No, it does not. It is an outlier from artistic perspective, development, time, and place. It is an outlier, too, among dozens of paintings that literally portray the same subject. It is even an outlier in how artists treated it. They sanctified their true copies, but not copies of copies. Next, we look at forensic investigations of the chest wound.